Welcome back to Managing People and Organizations, our revision lecture series. For this lecture, we'll be looking at lecture 4, which was on leadership. In this lecture, we looked at a number of different theories around leadership, beginning with trait theory. Trait theory assumes that leaders are great by their nature. That is, they're born a certain way, they're born with certain characteristics. And this research started with army psychologists, in fact, the British Army, trying to identify those soldiers who had leadership potential so that they could be recruited quickly up the ranks, and they tried to discern the certain trait characteristics, the stature, the tone of voice, the attitudes and values, even the size of leaders. And after lots and lots of research, that is researching their own leaders throughout the British Army, they were unable to find a specific set of criteria that said these are the specific trait characteristics of great leaders. They found that they had officers and generals, some were short, some were tall, some had a shrill voice, some had a deep voice, some had a very definitive and demanding attitude and way of dealing with people. Others were much more supportive and encouraging. And so there was nothing specific that they could say were the characteristics, these genetic personality characteristics that make for a great leader.
So the next approach is to consider that, with the trait approach, we had this idea that you were born with characteristics. The second approach, which is behavioral, underlines the fact that actually it's more about what you can do, and that a lot of these things can be learned. So, for instance, a leader should be able to communicate. Well, you can be trained to improve your communication skills. And some people might have some, natural aptitude to do things. A lot of the behaviors that were required from leaders to interact with the different types of people, to achieve different tasks, could be learned. So it opened a new perspective on leaders and a new responsibility also for organization to train and develop their leaders so that they could actually have the type of behaviors that was necessary.
These behaviors, they can be seen in terms of task, that is a leader who emphasizes getting things done, and other approaches that emphasize that communication and working with the employee. Which is most important? Well, it turns out that they're both important, and that leads to our third approach then, and that is contingency. Yeah. It depends on the context or the situation in which leadership is being enacted. And in the lecture we looked at some examples of leaders who in one context were seen as very effective and were very, very highly regarded for being able to get things done. But then when the situation changes or the contingency changes, they're not seen as very effective any longer. Once again, the contingency changes again. This is a political context, and this leader again becomes most ascendant because the situation is such that that particular leader's style of leadership matches or fits the contingency or the situation that requires their particular type of approach of leadership.
Now, what is changing in the context we're living in is that actually there are some key characteristics that are different from the context of the early 20th century or even later in the 20th century. And obviously one of the aspects is increased speed of change, more competition, and an increased level of qualification in the staff, which means that the role of the leader is shifting further away from the great person. And we've seen appear new models that include different aspects. The first one is the servant leadership, where the leader is more, to help, to support the followers, to develop them, and to act as a mentor of empowered people. And that's a good fit with a post-bureaucratic approach.
Authentic leadership is another approach that is developing. And with authentic leadership, you really have the leader working on their personal development. So developing their own sense of potential and achievement, working on their own values and psychology and mindset, and then supporting others. So mentoring others within the organization by providing them with tools to develop their sense of efficacy, that is their ability to achieve things and get things done, the communication skills, their sense of optimism, their sense of hope, and their ability to plan and look to the future with a vision and inspire that vision in others. And the idea with authentic leadership is such that with a leader who's working on developing themselves and mentoring and guiding, coaching others within the organization, it leads to a mentoring and guidance of the organization as a whole. So you have individual development to interpersonal development to organizational development.
And so altogether, that leads to an approach that will be more trying to develop a type of motivation rather than another, in more classic traditional styles that were associated to the great person. A lot of it was playing with intrinsic motivation. So it was extrinsic motivation, where we put pressure on people, and the people will be actually motivated with external factors, such as I'll do that so that I'll be rewarded by money. Now, with authenticity, self-development, and humility of leaders, we move towards a model where we're more likely to trigger intrinsic motivation, which is again connected with the idea of post-bureaucracy. So you'll encourage people to embrace what they are doing, and you'll help them achieve that because it's the right thing to do. And obviously it brings the question of ethics in leadership.
Yeah, because this post-bureaucratic approach to leadership then is about empowerment, and we've discussed earlier how this empowerment has a critical side to it, or from a critical management studies perspective, we look at this empowerment as a form of control that's much more subversive and much more efficient, but also questionable.
So now, if we summarize all this, and we have started to cover it, I mean, one of the key debate was, are leaders born or made? And obviously, as often, the answer is in between. While some people have sometimes a better, some fundamental reason why they are good at something, a lot of the qualities of leaders can be developed. And so that's a behavioral approach. So leaders certainly can be developed, and you can learn some of the leadership skills.
Another issue we've discussed is the traditional romanticized view of leadership. So particularly this assumption around leaders being born as having certain characteristics, then we see them, and the CEO has become so glamorized in our society today, and the wage differentials between what this average CEO earns and what the average worker earns, there's so much difference between them. And so we do in our society have a very romanticized view of leadership, but that's being questioned as well, particularly with the development of these more ethical and servant, humble leadership models. We're questioning our romance of leadership.
Yeah, and it's shifting a little bit the balance to the fact that there is actually great contribution by followers, and that's where leadership should exercise their skills, is to develop others and bring others to doing great things.
One of the things that we pointed out was that with the traditional leadership theories, that is trait theory and behavioral theory and contingency theory, there's no discussion around ethics or the values that a leader might be trying to share with their employees or exemplify within the organization. It's just not considered. With our post-bureaucratic approaches or these newer approaches, ethics, social responsibility, environmental responsibility, these things are being emphasized more and more.
Thank you.